We're gonna need one hell of a lawyer.
I think we're gonna need a helmet.
A movie about a pilot who finds an experimental jetpack and then uses it to get into all sorts of misadventures while trying to win back his best girl from a movie star who's also a spy. Happens every day.
Like in the comic books.
If I had an experimental jetpack, I may not be so ambitious. I might just use it for a side hustle to get some extra pocket money by delivering food. I mean, it will always arrive hot and crispy, even if it's a salad. The Rocketeer.
I like it.
The Rocketeer was a 1991 movie from director Joe Johnston, where a pilot finds a rocket pack but has to keep it away from some gangsters who are working for a Nazi spy who happens to be a movie star who's also got designs on his best girl.
No gentleman after 6 p.m.
Well, I'm no gentleman.
The movie didn't do all that well at the box office despite the potential for further adventures, and so this version of The Rocketeer was a one and done. Which is a pity since it was pretty fun then and it's aged fairly well. It's the late 1930s and pilot Clifford Secord and his mechanical offsider Peevy Peabody are preparing their entry into the Nationals. I mean, it could be the Nationals spelling bee, but we'll just go ahead and assume it's some airplane race where a win would make all of their dreams come true.
After you win the Nationals.
I mean, while watching this, I still held up some hope that it actually was a spelling bee they were going to, but then I wondered why they would need a plane, unless it was just easier to get to the National Spelling Bee by air.
Something ain't right.
Meanwhile, some fellas are being chased by cops and the FBI, and before their death or capture, they manage to interfere with Cliff's landing, which knocks them out of contention for the Nationals. But on the plus side, it does open up opportunities for them to attend that spelling bee.
Well, that's the end of that.
One of the ne'er-do-wells had hidden something in the lad's hangar, a metallic device that seems to be a prototype rocket that you strap to your back.
I wouldn't touch that if I were you.
A little testing proves that the rocket pack is just a little bit difficult to control, until Peevy puts together a customized helmet, complete with a built-in rudder, which in hindsight does explain why the rocket pack I built didn't work. Also, mine didn't have a rocket either, just some Diet Coke and Mentos. After Cliff uses the rocket pack to save a friend in a mid-air rescue, the press and public are taken with the idea of this hero nicknamed,
How about Rocketeer?
Yeah! Wow! That'll work!
I mean, that is a catchy name, you know, but I preferred some of the other suggestions like Missile Mike, Projectile Pete, and of course, the man with curiously singed buttocks.
That's not exactly what I had in mind.
There are various efforts to recover the rocket pack. There's the feds, one of whom is about as personable as a Mr. Rogers impersonator on his day off.
Well, maybe it's time to get a real job.
Then there are the mobsters led by Eddie Valentine, working for this fella, box office star Neville Sinclair. And then there's also this hulking brute Lothar, whose party piece is to fold people in half, which either makes him a scary henchman or the world's lousiest chiropractor. Meanwhile, Cliff and his best girl, aspiring actress Jenny Blake, are at a crossroads. Jenny learns of Cliff's near-death experience, which he hadn't mentioned at all, and like trying to go hang gliding in a basement, it doesn't go over too well.
You got a good thing going on with that girl, Clifford. But if she flies a coop, I'm telling you right now, it's going to be your fault.
Jenny has a small role on a medieval movie with the third biggest box office draw at the time, Neville Sinclair.
None of them!
But Billy shows up to apologise to Jenny and she is fired. However, Sinclair overhears Cliff explain to Jenny about the rocket pack and then things kick off. Sinclair swoops in to wine and dine Jenny in order to A, learn more about the location of the rocket pack, and B, get some.
Hands of the master sculptor.
Moonlight on Broadway. Carol Lombard. The scene on the top of the Empire State Building.
Lothar shows up at the house to look for the rocket pack. Then the feds show up, and then they start blasting away at each other, where the FBI carries out some nocturnal renovations to turn a charming low-set home with easy access to transport and schools into a fixer-upper.
We don't got a house, Clifford. We got a gazebo.
It's not a house anybody is going to quickly flip without a giant spatula. Cliff and Peevy are now on the run from everyone. That's spies, henchmen, mobsters, the feds. The only people that aren't after them, the Boy Scouts, Myrna Loy, and the future runners-up in the National Spelling Bee. Oh, and let's add Nazis to the list. That's the first list, not the second list. Sinclair turns out to be a spy for, well, guess who? Meanwhile, Cliff and Peevy meet Howard Hughes and are given some background info on the rocket pack. Cliff needs the pack one more time to try and rescue Jenny when everyone, and I mean everyone, descends on Griffith Observatory. That's spies, movie stars, mobsters, Nazis, and the FBI, which does sound like what happens when you fail to adequately proofread your Halloween party invitations. Then a big confrontation takes place on a Zeppelin, where even if you know nothing about chemistry,
Watch out for that Zeppelin! It's full of hydrogen! One bad shot, we'll all fry!
Neville Sinclair ends up taking the rocket pack for a jaunt and...
My heart would be a fireball, a fireball.
Lothar the undefeatable is now Lothar the previously undefeatable, and Jenny and Cliff embrace.
I bet if we increase the manifold pressure up about 25% and then switch the fuel to air ratio, just favoring the fuel, just a little.
And while the rocket pack has been destroyed, they still have the plans. Should they, I don't know, maybe need to build another jetpack in a few years down the track in a sequel, which, no, that was it. There had been a few theatrical serials in the late 40s and early 50s that followed the adventures of rocket men. There was King of the Rocket Men, Radar Men from the Moon, and Zombies of the Stratosphere, which all had different characters despite the lead using the same costume.
Calling Bob, calling Bob. Come in, Larry.
In fact, I made a 1950s serial using that suit, Rocky McRocketface, which was about somebody who strapped on a rocket pack and went to the moon, only to find there was nowhere to refuel. Today, it's one of the few serials that ends after one chapter. Dave Stevens' graphic novel, The Rocketeer, was first published in 1982, and it was something that harkened back to Golden Age comics. By the mid-80s, there were attempts to develop a live-action version of The Rocketeer, perhaps as a low-budget indie production, before Disney showed an interest in making Rocketeer as a Touchstone Pictures release. Script development went on for several years, with writers being replaced and later rehired. And like so many comic book-based movies of the early 90s,
I'm Batman.
Yep, it was Batman's success in 1989 that got studios in the mood for some green-lighting action. By now, it was going from a Touchstone release to a Walt Disney Pictures release, which saw some aspects of the original story being toned down, such as Cliff's girlfriend Betty. In the comic, she was a nude model, and for the PG-rated movie, she'd become an aspiring movie starlet.
Tell me that you're getting this! I'm getting it! I don't know what it is, but I'm getting it!
Joe Johnston joined as director, where he was a fan of comic books, and as somebody who was an early hire at ILM, he was comfortable around special effects on a movie set. Look, I'm quite comfortable around special effects on a movie set, just so long as the guys in the pyrotechnics department still have both eyes and all 10 fingers. And that's 10 fingers each, not in total. Johnston's first feature film as a director had been at the helm of the effects-laden movie Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and so something like The Rocketeer seemed right up his street. Disney had already had Warren Beatty's Dick Tracy movie in production when Batman hit in '89, and pretty soon we'd have movies like Darkman and a short-lived TV version of The Flash. One thing that would link The Flash and The Rocketeer: the same writers were responsible for both, Paul DeMeo and Danny Bilson. For no other reason that it seems vaguely interesting to mention, Danny Bilson would later become a big wheel at video game publisher THQ, and his daughter Rachel Bilson would become a famous TV actress. The comic's original creator, Dave Stevens, was on hand as a producer, where, unusually for the creator of a comic whose work is being adapted into a film, Stevens made it his business to be involved in the production. I dig. I remember the time I created a graphic novel that I later tried to turn into a movie. It was about D.B. Cooper running a detective agency that dealt exclusively with missing persons, though the agency was failing because the agency had no staff, no clients, no office, no phone number, no email or postal address.
Hey, I didn't blow up your truck. The guy in the car did, after bouncing off of you.
Bell Aerospace developed an actual thing that you strapped to your back and flew around on, the Bell Rocket Belt, which was also used in TV shows like Lost in Space and the James Bond film Thunderball. The idea still sounds cool, but generally impractical, much like my plan to build a cat submarine. Rocketeer was one of the last wave of 80s style effects adventure movies without relying on computer generated graphics, but the effects are some of the very best of the era. Johnston's former colleagues at ILM would produce some lovely special effects with a mix of models, animation, optical compositing, and practical effects. The movie's also got a killer score from James Horner, which does sound like an obvious thing. James Horner's scores were pretty much always amazing with their intricate melodies and orchestrations. His music always seems to be able to tap out the word swashbuckling in your head. Either that, or it's the after effects of the taser. It's a long story, I just don't want to talk about it.
The maiden voyage. How'd she fly?
She flew great. Landing had a few bumps.
Bill Campbell stars as Cliff, aka the Rocketeer, aka the man in the fire-resistant slacks, aka Hot Buns. He'd been in various things credited as Bill, Billy, or William O. Campbell to avoid the fact there was already another actor working as William Campbell.
He's probably hatching some harebrained scheme. Now he has an engine. Says you strap it on your back and...
I'm sorry.
Jennifer Connolly was making the difficult transition from child actor to ingenue, and then managed that well enough to maintain a relatively high profile for decades.
And then he kisses you.
No. He's too busy killing someone.
Alan Arkin was pretty much pitch perfect as Peevy, Cliff's best mate, a mechanic with a gruff exterior but a big heart.
Between the FBI and that King Kong gentleman, we're going to get ourselves killed over this thing.
Timothy Dalton was just coming off what turned out to be his final stint as James Bond, and was again showing us how much fun he could be as a villain.
It wasn't lies, Jen. It was acting.
Paul Sorvino played another gangster just after his role in the previous year's Goodfellas.
You'll triple my price.
And Terry O'Quinn pops up for a few scenes as Howard Hughes,
Tell him Howard Hughes said so.
who had designed the rocket pack, and at the end of the film will reward Cliff and Peevy with a new plane so they can continue their campaign to reach the National Spelling Bee. I mean the airplane race thingy. Here is what I don't understand about spelling bees. It's B-E-E-S. How hard is that?
How do I look?
Like a hood ornament.
The studio was buoyant about the film's prospects, and a wave of merchandise was prepared for what was hoped to be a big hit. And then on release in the summer of 1991, it quickly faded from view after grossing only slightly more at the box office than the film cost to make. Ouch. So the fact there wasn't a follow-up movie greenlit almost immediately is about as unsurprising as finding Santa ate all the cookies, but that the fat jerk still stiffed you on the mountain bike. Rocketeer is one of those movies that didn't find an audience on release, where the mostly positive reviews would have qualifications, where reviewers felt the movie was a little too clinical. In hindsight, though, it's a movie that's found an audience in the intervening years, where it's a movie with a fair bit of heart. There had been an idea that this would be the first in a trilogy of Rocketeer films, but the relatively poor box office take put an end to that. Rocketeer would be one of those films that people would discover on their own years later, and realise that, oh, it's actually quite good. Will the studio roll the dice and try again on a feature or a television series? Maybe, maybe not. There had been a short-lived animated series aimed at very young kids, but to date, nothing else has eventuated. Meanwhile, Rocky McRocketface is being rebooted with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's brother's catty-corner neighbour, Chet Flackenhack.
No, I'm not jealous.
Johnston would follow up Rocketeer with other effects-heavy films like Jumanji and Jurassic Park 3, and 2 decades later he would make another film with relatively similar elements to Rocketeer when he directed Captain America: The First Avenger. Jennifer Connolly would go on to be a major actress, Dalton would find villains were much more fun to play,
Hand over the rocket or I'll blow her brains.
All over the cabin.
Terry O'Quinn would get lost, and Campbell would have roles in many series, Once and Again, The 4400, and The Killing.
I'm the Rocketeer.
The Rock of who?
Melora Hardin would feature in The Office, and Max Grodenchik and Tiny Ron would both have recurring roles on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Rocketeer, aka the mobile smell of bacon, was an interesting character and premise that could have anchored several more adventures, but like using up a return ticket on the Titanic, it was not to be. A decent script, a solid cast, fun action, great special effects have made this a film that's only grown in stature over time.
You'd pay to see a man fly, wouldn't you?
If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.